I balanced the warm apple pie in one hand while pushing open Mom's front door with the other, the familiar scent of cinnamon and vanilla mixing with the cheerful sounds of family conversation drifting from the living room. My 10-year-old daughter, Emma, had already darted past me toward the backyard where my cousin's children were setting up a badminton net, her laughter joining the chorus of celebration for Mom's 70th birthday. Uncle Bradley was adjusting the volume on the old stereo system playing Mom's favorite jazz standards, while Aunt Susan arranged fresh sunflowers in a crystal vase near the window. My stepfather, Frank, stood at the kitchen island, carefully carving slices from a honey-glazed ham, his reading glasses perched on his nose, as he concentrated on making each portion perfect. Everything felt wonderfully normal, exactly as family gatherings should be. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket and Emma's trembling voice whispered words that would change everything. "Mom, get out of the house right now." My heart hammered against my ribs as I stepped through the sliding glass door onto the back patio, scanning the yard for Emma among the cluster of children. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the freshly mowed grass, and I could hear the distant hum of the central air conditioning unit mixing with the sounds of badminton rackets hitting shuttlecocks. I found her crouched behind the old wooden garden shed, tears streaming down her freckled cheeks, her small hands shaking as she clutched my phone to her ear. "Emma, what's wrong?" I whispered, kneeling beside her on the cool grass. The smell of mulch and blooming roses from Mom's flower beds surrounded us, but the beauty of the garden felt suddenly ominous. Her blue eyes, so much like my own, were wide with terror. "Mommy, I heard them talking in the basement. Uncle Bradley, Aunt Susan, and Frank, they were saying terrible things about you." Her voice broke on the last words, and she wiped her nose on her sleeve. "What kind of things, sweetheart?" I tried to keep my voice calm, but ice was already forming in my stomach. "They said they need to get rid of you permanently. Bradley said something about making it look like an accident, and Susan kept talking about insurance money. Frank had papers with him, and he said they've been planning this for months, waiting for today when everyone would be here together." Emma's words tumbled out in a rush, each one hitting me like a physical blow. I pulled her close, feeling her small body trembling against mine. Through the kitchen window, I could see Frank still carving the ham, his movements methodical and precise. Uncle Bradley was laughing at something Mom was saying, his arm draped casually around her shoulders. Aunt Susan was taking photographs of the birthday decorations, her smile bright and genuine. They all looked so normal, so loving, so incapable of the evil Emma was describing. "Are you absolutely certain about what you heard?" I asked, though every instinct in my body was already screaming at me to run. Emma nodded vigorously. "I went downstairs to get more paper plates from the storage room, and I heard them through the basement door. Frank said your life insurance policy is worth $400,000, and Bradley was talking about Grandma's house that you inherited. They think I'm just a dumb kid who doesn't understand grown-up talk, but I know what they meant, Mommy. They want to hurt you." My grandmother's Victorian house on Maple Street, the one she'd left me in her will 6 months ago, was worth nearly $600,000. Combined with my life insurance policy, someone would receive almost $1 million if I died. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. "We need to leave right now," I whispered, taking Emma's hand and leading her toward the back gate. My legs felt unsteady beneath me, and my mind raced with disbelief. How could my own family, people who had shared holidays and birthdays and ordinary Tuesday dinners with us, be plotting my murder? As we slipped through the gate into the alley behind Mom's house, I could hear Frank calling my name from the kitchen window. "Scarlett, where did you and Emma go? We're about to cut the birthday cake." His voice sounded so normal, so concerned, so perfectly innocent. If I hadn't heard Emma's terrifying account, I would have turned around and walked back into that house without a second thought. Instead, I guided Emma toward my car, parked 2 blocks away, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the keys into the ignition. "Where are we going, Mommy?" Emma asked as I pulled away from the curb, checking the rearview mirror obsessively to make sure no one was following us. "I don't know yet, baby, but you saved our lives today." I need you to know how proud I am of you for being so brave and smart." I reached over and squeezed her hand, trying to project calm while my entire world crumbled around me. The last thing I saw as we drove away was Frank's silhouette in Mom's front window, his phone pressed to his ear, his head turning left and right as if searching for something or someone. The image burned itself into my memory as I realized that the man who had been my stepfather for 5 years, who had walked me down the aisle at my wedding, who had taught Emma how to ride a bicycle, was planning to kill me for money. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot of a roadside motel called the Pine Rest Inn, its neon sign flickering weakly in the late afternoon light. The building looked tired and worn, with faded blue paint peeling from the exterior walls and weeds growing through cracks in the asphalt, but it offered something invaluable: anonymity. I paid cash for a room with 2 double beds, signing the registration card with a fake name, while Emma sat quietly in a vinyl chair, her school backpack clutched tightly against her chest. The room smelled like industrial disinfectant and old carpet with thin floral curtains that barely covered the single window overlooking the parking lot. I double-locked the door and fastened the security chain, then pulled the curtains closed and turned on every light in the room. Emma sat cross-legged on one of the beds, watching me pace back and forth across the small space. "Mommy, are we in trouble?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. "No, sweetheart, we're not in trouble, but I need to make some phone calls to figure out what we're going to do next." I sat beside her on the scratchy polyester bedspread and smoothed her dark hair away from her face. "First, though, I need you to tell me everything else you remember about what you heard in the basement." Emma took a deep breath and closed her eyes as if replaying the conversation in her mind. "Frank had a folder with papers in it. He showed Bradley and Susan something that made them both smile really big, like when you show me my report card. Susan said something about how nobody would ever suspect them because they're such a loving family. Bradley said you've been sad since Grandma died, so people would believe you might have had an accident. The cruelty of it took my breath away. They were planning to use my grief over losing my grandmother, the woman who had raised me after my father died, as cover for my murder. They would tell everyone I was depressed, that I had become careless or reckless, that my death was a tragic but understandable accident. Frank also said something about your medicine," Emma continued. "He said it would be easy because you already take pills for your headaches, and nobody would think it was weird if you took too many by mistake." "My prescription migraine medication. I kept it in my purse, took it as needed, never thinking that someone might use it against me. Frank had watched me take those pills dozens of times, had even brought me water when my headaches were particularly bad. He knew exactly how to make my death look like an accidental overdose." I walked to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains at the parking lot below. My phone had been buzzing constantly for the past hour, call after call, from Mom's landline, from Frank's cell phone, from numbers I didn't recognize. I had turned off the ringer, but the screen continued to light up with missed call notifications. "I need to call your school and tell them you won't be there tomorrow," I said, pulling out my phone and scrolling through my contacts. "And I need to call my work and tell them I have a family emergency." But even as I made those necessary calls, explaining to Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, that we had a sudden family crisis, and to my supervisor at the accounting firm that I needed emergency leave, I realized how isolated Frank's plan had made me. Who could I trust? Who would believe such an incredible story? My own mother clearly had no idea what her husband was planning. My brother lived in California and barely stayed in touch with the family. Most of my friends knew Frank and liked him. They would think I had lost my mind if I accused him of attempted murder. "Are you hungry?" I asked Emma after I finished the phone calls. She nodded, and I realized we had fled Mom's birthday party before eating anything except a few crackers and cheese. We walked across the parking lot to a convenience store attached to a gas station, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as we wandered the aisles looking for something that resembled dinner. I bought peanut butter and jelly sandwiches from the cooler section, along with chocolate milk for Emma and coffee for myself. At the cash register, I paid with the $68 I had in my wallet, acutely aware that I couldn't use my credit or debit cards without creating a trail that Frank might be able to follow. Back in our motel room, we sat on one of the beds eating our makeshift dinner while the local news played on the small television mounted to the wall. The anchors were discussing a house fire across town and an upcoming city council meeting, normal, everyday news that felt surreal given our circumstances. "Mommy, will we ever be able to go home?" Emma asked, picking at her sandwich. The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. Home. Our little yellow house on Oak Street with Emma's art projects stuck to the refrigerator and my grandmother's antique rocking chair by the living room window. Frank had keys to that house. He had helped me paint the kitchen last spring, had fixed the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom, had mowed the lawn every Saturday morning, while Emma and I made pancakes. How many times had he been alone in our house? What had he been doing there when we weren't around? I don't know, baby. But wherever we end up, we'll be together, and we'll be safe. That's what matters most. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders like a lead blanket. That night, Emma fell asleep curled up next to me, her breathing soft and steady while I stared at the water-stained ceiling and tried to process the magnitude of what we were facing. My stepfather, my uncle, and my aunt had spent months planning my murder. They had waited for the perfect opportunity, had prepared alibis, and cover stories had coldly calculated how to divide my assets after I was dead. And if Emma hadn't been brave enough to hide and listen, if she hadn't been smart enough to call me, if she hadn't trusted her instincts about the danger we were in, I would be dead by now, and they would be comforting each other at my funeral while planning how to spend my money. The realization that my own family had tried to kill me was devastating, but Emma's courage had saved us both. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I made a silent promise that I would find a way to protect her and bring the people who had betrayed us to justice, no matter how long it took or how difficult the battle became. I woke up at 4 a.m. with a crystal clear understanding of what I needed to do. While Emma slept peacefully beside me, I quietly gathered my thoughts and made a list of evidence I needed to collect before Frank and his accomplices could destroy it. My grandmother's house keys were still on my keychain, and I knew Frank didn't have copies of those. More importantly, I had installed a security camera system in my own home 3 months ago, after a series of break-ins in our neighborhood. If Frank had been in my house recently, those cameras would have recorded everything. I gently shook Emma awake as the first pale light of dawn filtered through the motel room curtains. "We need to go get some important things from our house, but we have to be very careful and very quiet," I whispered. Emma rubbed her eyes and sat up immediately alert despite the early hour. "Is it safe?" "We won't stay long and we'll be very sneaky about it. Frank thinks we're still hiding somewhere scared and helpless. He doesn't know we're going to fight back." We checked out of the motel and drove through the empty early morning streets to our neighborhood parking 3 blocks away from our house and walking through backyards to avoid being seen from the street. The suburban landscape looked different in the pre-dawn darkness, familiar houses transformed into shadowy silhouettes against the lightening sky. Dogs barked occasionally as we passed, but most of the neighborhood was still asleep. When we reached our backyard, my heart nearly stopped. Every light in the house was on, and I could see Frank's tall figure moving around in my kitchen, opening cabinets and drawers as if he owned the place. Through the dining room window, I watched him spread papers across my grandmother's antique oak table, the same table where Emma did her homework every afternoon. "Stay here and keep watch," I whispered to Emma, positioning her behind our neighbor's garden fence, where she could see the street. "If anyone comes, whistle as loud as you can." I crept to the basement window that I knew had a broken latch and carefully pried it open. The basement was dark and familiar, filled with storage boxes and Emma's outgrown toys. I made my way upstairs to the main level, moving as silently as possible across the hardwood floors I had refinished myself just 2 years ago. From the hallway, I could see Frank clearly now. He was sitting at my table with my laptop open, scrolling through what appeared to be my bank statements and financial records. A folder labeled Insurance Documents lay open beside him, and I could see copies of my life insurance policy with certain sections highlighted in yellow. My jewelry box sat nearby, already emptied of the diamond earrings my grandmother had given me for my wedding. Even more disturbing, Frank had brought his own suitcase and had clearly been staying in my house overnight. His clothes hung in my bedroom closet, his toiletries sat on my bathroom counter, and his coffee mug rested in my kitchen sink. He had moved into my home like a conquering army claiming territory that belonged to me and Emma. I quickly located the hidden security camera control panel in the basement and downloaded the footage from the past week onto a flash drive. The recordings showed Frank entering my house multiple times over the past 6 days, always when Emma and I were at work and school. I watched in horrified fascination as he systematically went through my personal belongings, photographed important documents, and even made copies of my house keys. But the most damning evidence was what I found in my own filing cabinet. Frank had created an entire folder of forged documents, including a fake will that left everything to him in the event of my death and correspondence with a lawyer I had never heard of about transferring the title of my grandmother's house. He had also been intercepting my mail and had collected information about my bank accounts, my credit cards, and even Emma's college savings account. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands shaking with rage and disbelief. This wasn't just a plan to kill me, it was a comprehensive scheme to steal my entire life. Frank had been preparing for months to erase my existence and claim everything I owned. As I prepared to leave, I heard Frank's voice coming from the kitchen. He was on the phone with someone, and his tone was agitated and urgent. "She's not answering her phone and her car is gone. The kid must have told her something. We need to find them before they go to the police." No, I searched the house thoroughly. She didn't take any important documents, so she probably doesn't know the full extent of what we've been planning. She's probably just scared and hiding somewhere nearby. The insurance policy is definitely still in effect. As long as we can make this look like an accident or a suicide, we'll get the full payout. But we need to move quickly before she has time to think clearly and figure out what's really going on. I had heard enough. I slipped back out through the basement window and found Emma exactly where I had left her, crouched behind the fence with her eyes fixed on the street. "Did you find what you needed?" she whispered as we made our way back to the car. "I found more than I needed," I replied grimly. "But now we have proof of what they're doing, and we're going to use it to stop them." As we drove away from our neighborhood, I realized that Frank's biggest mistake had been underestimating both Emma's intelligence and my determination. He thought he was dealing with a naive woman and a child who could be easily manipulated or eliminated. Instead, he was about to discover that he had chosen the wrong family to betray. By 8 o'clock that morning, Emma and I were sitting in the office of private investigator Riley Matthews, a former police detective who specialized in domestic fraud cases. His office occupied the second floor of a converted warehouse downtown, with exposed brick walls and large windows that flooded the space with natural light. Riley himself was a compact man in his 50s, with graying hair and intelligent brown eyes that missed nothing. "I've seen cases like this before, but never with this level of premeditation," Riley said after reviewing the security footage and photographs I had taken. He leaned back in his leather chair and studied the documents spread across his desk. "Your stepfather is either very experienced at this type of fraud, or he's getting professional help from someone who is." Emma sat quietly in a chair beside me, coloring in a book Riley had given her, but I could tell she was listening to every word. She had been through so much in the past 18 hours, yet she remained calm and alert, ready to help however she could. "What do you mean by professional help?" I asked. Riley pulled up a website on his computer and turned the screen so I could see it. "This law firm that Frank has been corresponding with doesn't actually exist. The address is a mailbox rental service, and the phone number goes to a voicemail system that's never answered. Someone created an elaborate fake law office specifically to help Frank forge documents related to your estate." The implications of this discovery sent chills through my entire body. So this isn't just Frank acting alone. Definitely not. This is organized fraud, possibly involving multiple victims across different states. The forged will you found is too sophisticated for an amateur to create. The letterhead, the legal language, the notarization stamps, everything is professionally done but completely fake. Riley opened another file on his computer and showed me a database of similar cases. I've been tracking patterns of insurance fraud involving family members, and several of these cases involve the same methods your stepfather is using. Fake lawyers forged wills, staged accidents that look like heart attacks or overdoses. Emma looked up from her coloring book. Does that mean Frank has hurt other people too? Riley's expression softened as he looked at her. That's what we're going to find out, sweetheart. But first we need to make sure you and your mom stay safe while we investigate. Over the next 2 hours, Riley walked me through the process of building a case against Frank and his conspirators. He explained how we could use the security footage as evidence, how to document the financial fraud, and how to protect Emma and myself from further attempts to harm us. But the most shocking revelation came when Riley ran Frank's name and social security number through his database of known criminals. Your stepfather's real name is Franklin Morrison, not Frank Miller, like he told your family, Riley said, pointing to a criminal record that appeared on his screen. He served 18 months in prison for insurance fraud in Nevada 12 years ago. The case involved the suspicious death of his first wife, who died of an apparent drug overdose just 6 months after taking out a large life insurance policy. I stared at the screen in horror. Frank had done this before. He had killed before, and my mother had married a murderer without knowing it. There's more. Riley continued scrolling through additional records. Franklin Morrison has been married 4 times in the past 15 years. 2 of his wives died in accidents. 1 died of an apparent suicide, and 1 divorced him after he tried to poison her. Each time he collected substantial life insurance payouts before moving to a new state and assuming a new identity. Emma had stopped coloring entirely and was listening with wide eyes. I reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently for comfort. The woman who survived and divorced him filed a police report claiming he had been systematically adding small amounts of prescription medication to her food to make her sick. Sound familiar? Riley looked at me meaningfully. My migraine medication. Frank knew exactly which pills I took, exactly how much was dangerous, exactly how to make my death look accidental. He had practiced this technique on other women, perfecting his method until he was confident he could kill without being detected. But here's the thing that concerns me most, Riley said, pulling out a map of the United States with red pins marking different locations. Frank's pattern involves staying in each area for 2 to 3 years, building relationships with local families, and then targeting women with substantial assets or insurance policies. He's been in your town for 5 years now, longer than any of his previous locations. That suggests he's been planning something bigger than his usual scheme. What do you mean bigger? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. I think he's been working on multiple targets simultaneously. Your mother has assets, you have insurance and your inheritance, but there might be other women in your community who Frank has been cultivating as potential victims. This could be much larger than just your family. The idea that Frank might be planning to hurt other innocent women made my stomach turn. How many other families were in danger? How many other children might lose their mothers to his greed? Riley handed me a business card for FBI agent David Park, who specialized in interstate insurance fraud cases. We need federal help with this. Frank's crimes cross state lines, involve identity fraud, and probably include multiple murders. This is beyond what local police can handle. As Emma and I left Riley's office, I felt a strange mixture of terror and determination. Learning about Frank's criminal history was horrifying, but it also meant we had solid evidence to use against him. He wasn't just a family member who had betrayed us. He was a professional killer who had been using our love and trust as weapons against us. "Mommy, are we going to catch the bad guys?" Emma asked as we walked to our car. "Yes, baby. We're going to catch them all. and we're going to make sure they never hurt anyone else again. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we had a real chance of winning this fight. Frank had made the mistake of targeting a woman who wouldn't go down without a battle, and a little girl who was brave enough to speak the truth, no matter how scary it was. He was about to learn that the wrong family doesn't just mean the wrong victim, it means the wrong enemy. 3 days later, Emma and I were eating breakfast in a different motel across town when someone knocked loudly on our door. Through the peephole, I could see a woman in a business suit holding an official-looking folder accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. "Mrs. Scarlett Johnson, I'm Janet Pierce from Child Protective Services. I need to speak with you about your daughter, Emma." I opened the door but kept the security chain attached, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. "What is this about?" "We received a report that you've kidnapped your daughter and are keeping her in unsafe living conditions. I need to conduct a welfare check and speak with Emma privately." Janet's voice was professional but cold, and I could see the police officers shifting their weight behind her hands, resting near their weapons. Emma appeared beside me, still wearing her pajamas, her eyes wide with fear. "Mommy, what's happening?" "May I come in?" Janet asked, though it was clearly not a request. I reluctantly unlatched the chain and stepped back, watching as Janet surveyed our modest motel room with obvious disapproval. She took note of the unmade beds, the fast food containers from last night's dinner, and our clothes scattered around in suitcases. "Emma, my name is Janet. I work for an organization that makes sure children are safe and happy. Can you tell me how long you've been staying here with your mother?" Emma looked at me uncertainly, then back at Janet. "A few days. We had to leave our house because bad people want to hurt us." Janet wrote something in her notebook. "What kind of bad people, sweetheart?" "My step-grandpa Frank and my aunt and uncle. They were planning to hurt my mommy for money, so we had to run away." Emma's voice was steady, but I could see her hands trembling. "Has your mother been giving you any medicine that makes you feel sleepy or sick?" "No." Emma's response was immediate and emphatic. "Mommy takes care of me. She makes sure I eat healthy food and brush my teeth and do my homework." But I could see Janet's expression growing more skeptical with each of Emma's answers. Someone had clearly prepared her with a very different story about our situation. "Mrs. Johnson, I need you to know that we have reports of you exhibiting erratic behavior, possible drug use, and making paranoid accusations against family members who are concerned for Emma's welfare. Your stepfather, Frank Miller, contacted us because he's worried about Emma's safety." The words hit me like physical blows. Frank had gotten to Child Protective Services first, spinning his lies and painting me as an unstable mother who was putting Emma in danger. "That's not true," I said, fighting to keep my voice calm and rational. "Frank is the one who's dangerous. I have evidence that he's planning to kill me for my life insurance money." Janet's eyebrows rose skeptically. "Do you have this evidence with you?" I pulled out my phone and showed her some of the photographs I had taken at my house, but I could see she was viewing them as the desperate fabrications of a delusional woman, rather than proof of a criminal conspiracy. "Mrs. Johnson, these pictures don't prove anything except that your stepfather has been in your house, which isn't unusual for a family member. What concerns me is that you've removed Emma from her stable home environment and are keeping her in a motel without proper supervision or educational support." "She's not missing school," I protested. "I called her teacher and explained that we have a family emergency." "Yes, we spoke with Mrs. Rodriguez. She confirmed that Emma has been absent for 3 days without proper documentation." Janet made another note in her file. Emma stepped forward, her small chin raised defiantly. "Mrs. Pierce, my mommy is telling the truth. I heard Frank and the others planning to hurt her. They said they would make it look like an accident and take all our money. My mommy didn't kidnap me. She saved me." For a moment, Janet's expression softened as she looked at Emma's earnest face. But then she shook her head. "Children sometimes misunderstand adult conversations, especially when they're already anxious or upset." "I'm 10 years old, not 5, Emma said firmly. I know the difference between grown-ups talking about normal things and grown-ups planning to hurt someone. Frank said my mommy's life insurance was worth $400,000, and he talked about her medicine making her sick. I know what I heard. Despite Emma's compelling testimony, I could see that Janet had already made up her mind about our situation. Someone had coached her thoroughly, providing her with just enough manufactured evidence to make Frank's story seem credible. Mrs. Johnson, I'm going to need you to bring Emma back to your family home today. Your mother and stepfather are extremely worried, and they've agreed to provide temporary custody while we investigate these allegations. Absolutely not, I said, moving protectively in front of Emma. I will not put my daughter in danger just because you believe the word of a man who's trying to kill me. One of the police officers stepped forward. Ma'am, if you don't cooperate voluntarily, we'll have to consider this a kidnapping situation. The irony was devastating. The people who were supposed to protect children were about to hand Emma over to the very people who had threatened our lives. Frank's manipulation was so thorough, so convincing, that even government officials couldn't see through his lies. Can I call my lawyer? I asked, though I wasn't even sure I had enough money left to pay for legal representation. Of course, Janet replied, but Emma will need to be placed in protective custody until this is resolved. No, Emma cried out, grabbing my hand. I want to stay with my mommy. She didn't do anything wrong. Janet knelt down to Emma's eye level. Sweetheart, I know this is scary, but sometimes adults need help figuring out what's best for children. You'll be safe with your grandmother, and if your mother is telling the truth, she'll be able to prove it and get you back. As I watched Janet trying to separate me from Emma, I realized that Frank's plan was even more diabolical than I had originally understood. He wasn't just trying to kill me for money, he was systematically destroying my credibility and my relationship with my daughter first. By the time he was finished, even if I survived his murder attempt, I would have lost everything that mattered to me. But Emma wasn't giving up without a fight. Mrs. Pierce, please call my teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, and ask her if I've ever seemed scared of my mommy, or if I've ever come to school hungry or dirty or hurt. Please ask my doctor if my mommy takes good care of me. Please ask anyone who actually knows us, not just the people who are trying to hurt us. Janet paused, clearly surprised by Emma's mature and logical request. That's exactly what we plan to do as part of our investigation. Then why can't I stay with my mommy while you do that investigation? If you talk to people who really know us, you'll find out she's telling the truth. For the first time since arriving, Janet looked uncertain. Emma's calm, reasoned argument was clearly having an impact, even though she had been prepared to believe Frank's lies. I'll tell you what, Janet said finally. I'm going to contact Emma's teacher, her doctor, and some other references today. If they all confirm that Emma is well cared for and that there are no signs of neglect or abuse, we can discuss allowing you to stay together temporarily while we investigate your allegations about your family members. It wasn't the victory I had hoped for, but it was better than having Emma taken away immediately. As Janet and the police officers left, I held my daughter close and realized that Frank had underestimated both of us once again. Emma's courage and intelligence were going to be just as important as any evidence I could gather. You were amazing, baby, I whispered into her hair. You just bought us time to prove the truth. Mommy, are we going to be okay? She asked, her voice small but determined. Yes, we are, because we have something Frank doesn't have. What's that? We have each other, and we have the truth. And in the end, that's always stronger than lies. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:30, waking Emma and me from the first solid sleep we'd had in days. I expected another threatening call from Frank, or maybe Janet Pierce with more accusations, but instead I heard the warm, familiar voice of Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma's fourth-grade teacher. Scarlett, I just got off the phone with Child Protective Services, and I need you to know that I told them exactly what I think about these ridiculous accusations against you. Her voice was filled with indignation and fierce protectiveness. I've been Emma's teacher for 8 months now, and I've never seen a more well-adjusted, healthy, happy child in my entire career. Relief flooded through me so powerfully that I had to sit down on the edge of the motel bed. Finally, someone in authority was taking our side. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I can't tell you how much this means to me. Emma and I have been so scared and alone." "You're not alone anymore," she said firmly. "I also need you to know that I never trusted Frank. There was something about the way he looked at Emma during school events that made me uncomfortable. He was always asking too many questions about your family's financial situation and Emma's inheritance from her great-grandmother." This revelation hit me like a lightning bolt. Frank had been gathering information about us from multiple sources, including Emma's school. He had been planning this for much longer than I had realized. "Did he ask about anything specific?" I asked, reaching for a pen to write down everything Mrs. Rodriguez remembered. "Last month, during the parent-teacher conference, he spent 20 minutes asking about Emma's college fund and whether you had life insurance through your job. He claimed he was trying to help with financial planning, but it felt invasive and inappropriate. I actually made a note about it in my file because it bothered me so much." Emma was awake now, listening to my side of the conversation with bright, alert eyes. I put the call on speaker so she could hear Mrs. Rodriguez's support directly. "Emma, honey, are you there?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked. "I'm here, Mrs. Rodriguez. Thank you for believing us." "Sweetheart, I told that social worker that you are one of the smartest, most honest children I've ever taught. If you say you heard those adults planning to hurt your mother, then I believe every word of it." After we hung up with Mrs. Rodriguez, my phone rang again almost immediately. This time it was Dr. Sarah Chen, Emma's pediatrician, who had also been contacted by Child Protective Services. "Scarlett, I reviewed Emma's entire medical file before I called that social worker back," Dr. Chen said without preamble. "Emma has never missed a single vaccination or checkup. She's never shown any signs of neglect, abuse, or malnutrition. In fact, her health records show a child who is exceptionally well cared for. I told CPS that if they remove Emma from your custody based on these accusations, they'll be making a serious mistake." Dr. Chen's professional endorsement carried significant weight, and I felt another wave of hope washing over me. But her next revelation was even more important. I also told CPS that I had concerns about Frank after Emma's last checkup in February. He insisted on coming into the examination room with you, and he kept asking about Emma's mental health and whether children her age were prone to making up stories about adults. At the time, I thought he was just being an overprotective step-grandfather, but now I realize he was laying groundwork to discredit Emma if she ever tried to expose him. The pieces of Frank's manipulation were becoming clearer with each conversation. He had spent months preparing for this moment, creating doubt about Emma's credibility and my stability long before putting his murder plan into action. "Dr. Chen, would you be willing to write a formal statement about Emma's health and your concerns about Frank?" "Already done," she replied. "I faxed a detailed report to CPS this morning, and I'm copying your lawyer on everything." "I don't have a lawyer yet," I admitted. "You do now. Mrs. Rodriguez and I discussed your situation, and we both know Amanda Walsh, who handles family court cases. She's agreed to represent you pro bono because she believes children should never be separated from loving parents based on false accusations." 20 minutes later, Amanda Walsh called me from her office downtown. She was a sharp, no-nonsense attorney in her 40s who specialized in protecting families from exactly the kind of systematic manipulation Frank was using against us. "Scarlett, I've reviewed the CPS file and I can see Frank's fingerprints all over this case," Amanda said. "The accusations against you are textbook examples of how abusers isolate their victims and turn institutions against them. But we have strong evidence in your favor, and I'm confident we can fight this." Amanda explained that Frank had made several strategic errors in his approach to CPS. He'd been too eager to provide detailed accusations, too quick to volunteer information about my alleged mental health issues, and too prepared with solutions like temporary custody arrangements. Experienced social workers often recognize these patterns as signs of manipulation rather than genuine concern. The good news is that Janet Pierce is actually a very good social worker who's just been fed a lot of convincing lies, Amanda continued. Once she sees the supporting evidence from Emma's teacher and doctor, plus the criminal background check I'm requesting on Frank, she'll realize she's been used. Can you request a criminal background check? I asked. Already in progress. And Scarlett, I need to tell you something important. Frank made a big mistake when he involved CPS. Now there's an official case file, which means law enforcement will start paying attention to his activities. He's not operating in the shadows anymore. After I hung up with Amanda, Emma and I sat together on the motel bed, feeling hopeful for the first time since this ordeal began. We weren't alone anymore. We had allies who believed in us and were willing to fight for us. Mommy, why do you think Mrs. Rodriguez and Dr. Chen are helping us when they don't have to? Emma asked. I thought about her question carefully, because they're good people who recognize the truth when they see it, and because they care about protecting children and families. Do you think there are more good people than bad people in the world? I think there are a lot more good people, baby. The problem is that bad people like Frank are very good at hiding who they really are and manipulating others. But once good people understand what's really happening, they almost always do the right thing. Emma nodded thoughtfully. So our job is to help the good people understand the truth. Exactly, and we're doing a pretty good job of that so far. As we prepared to meet with Amanda Walsh in person, I realized that Frank's plan was starting to unravel. He had counted on us being isolated and friendless, on having no one to turn to for help. Instead, his attacks on us had revealed his true nature to people who were in positions to expose him and protect us. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like we were winning. The next morning, I woke up to see my own face staring back at me from the television screen in our motel room. The local news anchor was describing me as a disturbed mother who abducted her 10-year-old daughter during a family gathering and asking viewers to call police if they spotted Emma or me anywhere in the area. This is insane. I whispered quickly, changing the channel, only to find the same story on 3 other local stations. Frank had somehow convinced the media that I was a dangerous kidnapper who posed a threat to my own child. Emma sat up in bed and saw the television coverage, her face going pale, as she watched Uncle Bradley being interviewed outside Mom's house. He was wearing his best suit and had clearly prepared his talking points in advance. Scarlett has been struggling with depression and paranoid thoughts since her grandmother died. Bradley told the reporter with perfect fake concern. We're all very worried about her mental state, and we just want Emma to be safe. We're begging Scarlett to bring Emma home before someone gets hurt. The lies were so smooth, so convincing that I almost started to doubt my own memory of what Emma had overheard. Bradley looked genuinely worried, genuinely loving, genuinely innocent. If I hadn't seen the evidence with my own eyes, I might have believed him myself. Then Aunt Susan appeared on screen, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue as she spoke to another reporter. Emma is such a sweet, innocent little girl. She doesn't understand what's happening and she must be so frightened. Scarlett has always been unstable, but we never thought she would put Emma in danger like this. Turn it off, Mommy, Emma said quietly. I don't want to watch them lie about us anymore. But the damage was already done. As we drove to our meeting with attorney Amanda Walsh, I noticed people looking at our car more carefully, checking license plates and studying Emma's face. Frank had turned us from victims into fugitives with just a few well-placed phone calls to local news stations. Amanda's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown with high ceilings and original hardwood floors that creaked as we walked upstairs to her second-floor suite. She met us at the door with a grim expression and a stack of newspapers under her arm. The media coverage is worse than I expected, she said, leading us into her office and closing the door firmly behind us. Frank is playing this perfectly. He's created a narrative where you're the unstable aggressor and he's the concerned family member trying to protect Emma. How is this legal? I asked, sinking into one of the leather chairs across from Amanda's desk. How can they just lie about us on television? Technically, they're not lying, Amanda explained. Everything they're saying is phrased as opinion or concern rather than factual statements. Bradley says you've been struggling and that he's worried about your mental state. Susan says you've always been unstable, but frames it as her perception rather than a medical diagnosis. It's manipulation, but it's not legally actionable defamation. Emma climbed into the chair next to mine and pulled her knees up to her chest. Are people going to try to catch us now? Amanda's expression softened as she looked at Emma. Some people might try to help the police find you because they think they're helping keep you safe. But we're going to make sure everyone understands the real truth about what's happening. How? I asked. We're going public with our side of the story. I've arranged for you to be interviewed by investigative reporter Michelle Santos at Channel 7. She specializes in exposing family fraud and domestic abuse cases, and she's very good at helping viewers see through manipulation tactics. The idea of appearing on television terrified me, but I realized it was our only chance to counter Frank's lies with our own truth. What about Emma? I don't want her to be exposed to more media attention. Emma will stay here with my paralegal during the interview. But Scarlett, I need you to understand that this is our one chance to change the narrative. If we don't act quickly, public opinion will solidify around Frank's version of events, and it will be almost impossible to change people's minds later. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a television studio across from Michelle Santos, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who had built her career on exposing exactly the kind of manipulation Frank was using against my family. Scarlett, I've reviewed the evidence you provided about your stepfather's criminal background and the forged documents found in your home, Michelle said as the cameras rolled. Can you walk us through what really happened at your mother's birthday party? I took a deep breath and told our story from the beginning, starting with Emma's terrifying phone call and ending with the discovery of Frank's previous murders and identity fraud. Michelle asked tough questions, challenging me to provide specific details and evidence for every claim I made. You understand that your family members are telling a very different story, Michelle said. They claim you've been paranoid and delusional, that you're putting Emma in danger by keeping her away from home and school. Emma saved both our lives by being brave enough to listen when adults were planning something terrible and smart enough to warn me before it was too late, I replied. I would rather have people think I'm crazy than have my daughter grow up without a mother because I was too polite to believe what she heard. The interview aired that evening, providing a counterpoint to Frank's media manipulation. Michelle had also done her own investigation, confirming Frank's criminal background and interviewing law enforcement officials who confirmed that his previous wives had died under suspicious circumstances. But Frank was ready for our counterattack. Within hours of the interview airing, he appeared on a competing news program with his own rebuttal. It breaks my heart to see Scarlett making these desperate accusations, he said, his voice heavy with fake sadness. She's clearly having some kind of breakdown, and instead of getting the help she needs, she's dragging poor Emma deeper into her delusions. These so-called criminal records are either completely fabricated or refer to a different person with a similar name. Watching Frank lie so smoothly and convincingly on television made my stomach turn, but I also noticed something important. He was working too hard to discredit the evidence. If our accusations were truly baseless, he wouldn't need to spend so much time and energy fighting them. He's scared, Amanda said when she called me after Frank's interview. He's making mistakes now, getting too defensive, providing too much detail in his denials. Experienced investigators will start to see the patterns. What kind of patterns? I asked. Guilty people often over-explain and over-justify their innocence. They provide information that wasn't asked for, and they attack their accusers instead of simply denying the charges. Frank is doing all of those things. That night, as Emma and I watched the local news coverage of our case from our new motel room across town, I realized that Frank had made a critical error. By involving the media, he had opened our situation up to public scrutiny and professional investigation. He was no longer operating in the shadows, manipulating family dynamics and government agencies. Now he was facing experienced journalists and legal professionals who specialized in recognizing exactly his type of manipulation. "Mommy, do you think people believe us now?" Emma asked as we got ready for bed. Some people do, and that's enough to keep us safe while we build our case against Frank and his helpers. Are we going to win? I looked at my brave, intelligent daughter and felt a surge of determination that surprised me with its intensity. Yes, baby, we're going to win, because Frank made the biggest mistake a criminal can make. What's that? He messed with the wrong family. 3 days later, Amanda Walsh called with news that changed everything about our case. FBI agent David Park had obtained federal court orders to access Frank's financial records, and what they found was far worse than anyone had imagined. "Scarlett, you need to sit down for this," Amanda said when Emma and I arrived at her office. "Frank isn't just a serial killer. He's been running a sophisticated fraud operation for over 15 years. Emma was in Amanda's waiting area with the paralegal working on homework and staying occupied, while Amanda and I discussed the latest developments in our case. I was grateful she didn't have to hear the horrifying details of Frank's criminal history. Amanda spread a series of bank statements and insurance documents across her conference table. Frank has been married 6 times, not 4, like we originally thought. All of his wives had substantial life insurance policies or inheritances. 5 of them are dead, and 1 is in a psychiatric facility in Oregon, completely incapacitated by what doctors believe was systematic poisoning. The room seemed to spin around me as I processed this information. Frank hadn't just killed 2 or 3 women for money. He had been systematically murdering wives for over a decade. Each time he used the same pattern, Amanda continued, he would move to a new area, assume a new identity, and target vulnerable women who had recently lost family members or were going through divorces. He specialized in finding women who had children because single mothers were often more trusting of men who seemed good with kids. "How did he get away with it for so long?" I asked. He was very careful to space out his crimes geographically and chronologically. He never killed more than 1 wife in the same state, and he always waited at least 2 years between murders. He also varied his methods. Some deaths looked like accidents, some looked like suicides, some looked like heart attacks or overdoses. Amanda pulled out a map of the United States with red pins marking the locations of Frank's previous crimes. But here's the breakthrough that's going to help us catch him. The FBI found recordings. What kind of recordings? Frank apparently recorded conversations with all of his co-conspirators as insurance against being betrayed. When they raided a storage unit he rents under another false name, they found hours of audio recordings documenting his plans with various family members and accomplices. Amanda played a short segment of one recording through her computer speakers. Frank's voice was unmistakable as he discussed the best methods for making poison look like prescription medication and how to forge suicide notes that would convince investigators. The most important discovery is that Frank has been planning your murder for over 18 months, not just a few weeks like we originally thought. He has recordings of conversations with Bradley and Susan dating back to last Christmas, when they first started discussing your grandmother's inheritance. The betrayal cut even deeper than I had imagined. While I was grieving my grandmother's death and trying to help Emma adjust to life without her great-grandmother, my own family members were plotting to kill me for the money she had left me. "There's more," Amanda said, pulling out another file. Frank made the mistake of recording a conversation where he admits to killing his previous wives. He was apparently bragging to Bradley about how easy it was to manipulate grieving families and stupid police investigators. As Amanda played more excerpts from Frank's recordings, I realized that his arrogance had become his downfall. He was so proud of his criminal skills that he couldn't resist documenting his crimes and boasting about his successes. The FBI is coordinating with police departments in 6 different states to reopen investigations into the deaths of Frank's previous wives, Amanda explained. They're also investigating several other suspicious deaths in our area that might be connected to Frank's activities. Other deaths? You mean he might have killed other people besides his wives? Frank apparently targets entire families when the financial payoff is large enough. The FBI found evidence that he may have been involved in the deaths of several elderly relatives of his wives, people who had substantial estates or life insurance policies that benefited the families Frank married into. The scope of Frank's criminal operation was staggering. He wasn't just a man who killed wives for insurance money. He was a predator who destroyed entire families for financial gain. "What does this mean for Emma and me?" I asked. "It means you're going to be the star witnesses in one of the largest serial murder cases in recent history," Amanda replied. "And it means Frank is going away for the rest of his life." "But first we need to catch him," a new voice said from the doorway. FBI agent David Park entered Amanda's office, a tall man in his 50s with graying hair and kind eyes that didn't hide the steel behind them. "Agent Park has been working on cases connected to Frank's activities for 3 years, Amanda explained. "He's been trying to build a case against Frank for the murder of his wife in Arizona." "Scarlett, I need you to understand how important you and Emma are to our investigation," Agent Park said, sitting down across from me at the conference table. "Emma's testimony about overhearing Frank's confession is the first direct witness account we've ever had of Frank planning a murder. And your evidence gathering shows a level of premeditation and conspiracy that we've never been able to prove before." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we set a trap. Frank still thinks you're a scared victim hiding in motel rooms with your daughter. He doesn't know we have recordings of his confessions, and he doesn't know we've connected him to murders in other states. We're going to use that advantage to make him incriminate himself even further." Agent Park explained that they wanted me to contact Frank and arrange a meeting where he would think he could convince me to return home quietly. They would wire the meeting location and record everything Frank said. "It's dangerous," Agent Park admitted. "Frank is a sophisticated killer who's been doing this for a long time, but we'll have agents positioned everywhere, and we'll move in the moment Frank says anything that threatens you directly." "What about Emma?" "Emma will be in federal protective custody during the operation. She'll be safe, and she'll have trained agents watching her every second." As I considered Agent Park's proposal, I realized that this was our chance to end Frank's killing spree permanently. If I could get him to confess on tape, he would never be able to hurt another family again. "I'll do it," I said, "but I want Emma to understand what's happening and why it's necessary." Agent Park nodded. "Emma is an incredibly brave and smart little girl. I think she'll understand that we're trying to protect other children from losing their mothers the way she almost lost hers." When we explained the plan to Emma, her response surprised both Amanda and Agent Park. "I want to help catch him too," Emma said firmly. "Frank hurt a lot of people and he was going to hurt us. If I can help stop him from hurting anyone else, then that's what I want to do." "You've already helped more than you know, sweetheart," Agent Park replied. "Your courage in warning your mother and telling the truth about what you heard is going to put Frank in prison for the rest of his life." As we prepared for the most dangerous phase of our fight against Frank, I felt a mixture of terror and hope. We were about to face a man who had killed multiple women and manipulated countless families, but we weren't facing him alone anymore. We had the federal government on our side, we had evidence of his crimes, and most importantly, we had each other. Frank had spent months planning my murder, but he had made one critical miscalculation. He had underestimated the strength of the bond between a mother and daughter and the power of truth to overcome even the most sophisticated lies. 2 days later, Emma and I said goodbye in the parking lot of a safe house 20 miles outside of town. She would be staying with 2 female FBI agents who specialized in protecting child witnesses, while I prepared to face Frank in what Agent Park hoped would be the final confrontation of our ordeal. "Mommy, promise me you'll be careful," Emma said, wrapping her arms around my waist and holding on tight. "I promise, baby, and you promise me you'll do exactly what the agents tell you, okay?" "I promise, and Mommy, when this is over, can we get a dog?" The question was so normal, so wonderfully ordinary that it made me laugh despite my fear. "Yes, we can definitely get a dog. Any particular kind? A big one that will protect us and love us and never lie to us." "That sounds perfect." Agent Park drove me to the staging area in an unmarked van filled with recording equipment and communication devices. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would call Frank from a burner phone, pretending to be exhausted and ready to come home. I would suggest meeting at a family restaurant to work things out before returning to Mom's house with Emma. Remember, Frank is going to try to manipulate you emotionally, Agent Park said, as technicians fitted me with a nearly invisible recording device. He'll probably apologize, claim everything was a misunderstanding, and try to convince you that Emma misheard or misunderstood what was said. What if he doesn't admit to anything? I asked. He will. Frank's ego is his weakness. He can't resist showing off how clever he is, and he'll want to convince you that you're no match for his intelligence. Killers like Frank have a compulsive need to explain their superiority to their victims. The restaurant Agent Park had chosen was a chain family establishment in a busy shopping center with multiple exits and clear sight lines for surveillance. Federal agents would be positioned at tables throughout the restaurant, disguised as ordinary customers having lunch with their families. At exactly 2 o'clock, I dialed Frank's number from the burner phone, my hands shaking as I waited for him to answer. Scarlett. Oh, thank God, I've been so worried about you and Emma. Frank's voice was perfectly pitched with relief and concern, exactly the tone a loving stepfather would use. Frank, I need to talk to you. Emma and I are tired of hiding, and I think maybe we overreacted to something we didn't understand properly. Of course, sweetheart. Family misunderstandings happen all the time. The important thing is that you and Emma are safe. Where are you? I can come get you right now. I'd rather meet somewhere neutral first just to talk things through. There's a lot of confusion about what happened, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page before I bring Emma home. Frank was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he calculated his next move. That's very wise of you, Scarlett. Where would you like to meet? I gave him the name and address of the restaurant, and we agreed to meet in 30 minutes. As I hung up the phone, Agent Park nodded approvingly. Perfect. He took the bait completely. Now remember, your job is just to get him talking. Don't try to be clever or tricky. Just act like a tired, confused woman who wants to believe the best about her family. 25 minutes later, I was sitting in a booth near the back of the restaurant, my hands wrapped around a coffee cup to keep them from shaking. I could see at least 6 FBI agents positioned at various tables around the dining room, though they looked completely natural as they ate lunch and chatted with their partners. Frank arrived exactly on time, scanning the restaurant carefully before approaching my table. He looked older than I remembered, with deep lines around his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that suggested he was under more stress than he wanted to admit. Scarlett, you look terrible, he said as he slid into the booth across from me, his voice filled with fake concern. You've lost weight and you have dark circles under your eyes. This whole situation has been so hard on everyone. I've been worried and confused, I replied, sticking to the script Agent Park had suggested. Emma keeps insisting she heard you and Bradley and Susan planning to hurt me, but I keep thinking she must have misunderstood something. Frank's expression softened into what appeared to be grandfatherly kindness. Of course she misunderstood. Children that age don't have the context to interpret adult conversations properly. We were discussing your finances and your insurance policies, trying to figure out how to help you manage everything after your grandmother's death. Emma said she heard you talking about making something look like an accident. We were talking about your grandmother's car accident, sweetheart. You know how traumatic that was for the whole family, especially for Emma. She must have heard fragments of our conversation about that tragedy and thought we were talking about you. Frank's explanation sounded perfectly reasonable, exactly the kind of innocent misunderstanding that could spiral into family drama. If I hadn't seen the evidence of his criminal history and the forged documents in my house, I might have believed him completely. I feel so stupid for overreacting, I said, letting genuine emotion creep into my voice. I was so scared that I just grabbed Emma and ran without thinking clearly. That's completely understandable, Frank said, reaching across the table to pat my hand in a gesture that would have looked caring to anyone watching. You're a protective mother, and you thought your child was in danger. No one blames you for that instinct. But now I don't know how to fix things. Emma keeps insisting that she heard you planning something terrible and she's afraid to come home." Frank leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Scarlett, I need you to understand something about children Emma's age. They have very active imaginations, and they sometimes convince themselves that their fantasies are real. Has Emma been having nightmares or anxiety since her great-grandmother died?" "Some," I admitted, which was true. Children process grief differently than adults do. Emma might have created this elaborate story about family danger as a way of expressing her fear about losing another important person in her life. Frank's psychological manipulation was masterful, providing rational explanations for everything Emma had heard while subtly suggesting that she was emotionally unstable and unreliable. If I hadn't known the truth about his criminal history, his explanation would have been completely convincing. "So you think Emma just imagined the whole thing?" I asked. Frank smiled warmly, the expression of a loving grandfather trying to help his confused daughter-in-law understand her troubled child. "I think Emma heard fragments of adult conversation, mixed them together with her own fears about losing you, and created a story that made sense to her 10-year-old mind. It's actually quite common in children who have experienced recent trauma." "That does make sense," I said slowly, as if I were seriously considering his explanation. "The important thing now is getting Emma the help she needs to process her grief properly and getting your family back together where everyone belongs." Frank's voice carried just the right tone of gentle authority and loving concern. But then something changed in his expression. A flicker of calculation passed behind his eyes, and I realized he was about to make the mistake Agent Park had predicted. "Scarlett, I need you to understand something else. If Emma continues to repeat these stories about overhearing murder plans, people might start to believe her, and that could cause serious problems for all of us." "What kind of problems?" I asked, though my heart was already racing. Frank leaned even closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The kind of problems that could tear this family apart permanently. The kind of problems that could result in Emma being taken away from you for good." And there it was, the threat that revealed Frank's true nature, captured perfectly by the recording equipment I was wearing and overheard by 6 federal agents positioned throughout the restaurant. Frank had just made the fatal error that would destroy him completely. Frank's subtle threat hung in the air between us like poison gas, but I forced myself to maintain the facade of a confused, frightened mother who was beginning to doubt her own child's testimony. Agent Park had prepared me for this moment, explaining that Frank would eventually reveal his true nature if I gave him enough rope to hang himself with. "Frank, you're scaring me," I said, letting my voice tremble with genuine fear. "Are you saying that Emma could be taken away from me just for telling people what she thinks she heard?" His expression immediately softened back into grandfatherly concern, but I had seen the flash of his real self, and I knew the FBI agents watching us had seen it too. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to protect you and Emma from the consequences of this misunderstanding getting blown out of proportion." "I don't understand what you mean." Frank glanced around the restaurant, checking to make sure no one was listening to our conversation. Of course, he had no idea that half the customers around us were federal agents recording every word he said. "Scarlett, you know I love you and Emma like my own family. That's why I need to be honest with you about something that's very difficult to discuss." He paused dramatically, as if gathering the courage to share a painful truth. "There are people in this family who have been concerned about your mental health since your grandmother died." "What people? What concerns?" "Your mother has noticed some changes in your behavior. Mood swings, paranoid thoughts, difficulty concentrating at work. She's been worried that you might be having some kind of breakdown, but she didn't want to hurt your feelings by bringing it up directly." The lie was so smooth and convincing that for a moment I almost believed it myself. Frank had clearly spent considerable time preparing this narrative, creating doubt about my mental stability that would make Emma's testimony seem unreliable. "I haven't been having mood swings," I protested weakly. Sometimes people don't recognize changes in their own behavior, especially when they're under stress. And the truth is, if Emma continues telling people that she overheard family members planning to commit murder, Child Protective Services is going to take that very seriously. They're going to want to know why a 10-year-old child is having such disturbing thoughts. Frank's manipulation was becoming more aggressive now, and I could see him growing more confident as he believed I was falling for his lies. Agent Park had warned me that this moment would come when Frank would become so convinced of his own cleverness that he would start revealing more than he intended. "What are you suggesting I do?" I asked. "I think Emma needs professional help to process her grief and confusion, and I think you might benefit from some counseling too, just to help you deal with the stress of losing your grandmother and raising Emma on your own." "And if I don't agree to counseling?" Frank's mask slipped again just for a split second, and I saw the cold calculation behind his concerned expression. "Scarlett, I'm trying to help you avoid a situation where Emma gets taken away from you permanently. If she keeps telling people these stories, and if you keep supporting her delusions instead of getting her help, the authorities are going to conclude that you're an unfit mother who's encouraging your child to make false accusations against innocent family members." The threat was becoming clearer now, wrapped in language that sounded helpful and caring, but carried the unmistakable message that Frank had the power to destroy my relationship with Emma if I didn't cooperate with his plans. "You're saying I should tell Emma that she imagined everything she heard." "I'm saying you should get Emma the professional help she needs to understand the difference between reality and the fantasies her grief has created." Frank reached across the table and took my hand in what would look like a comforting gesture to anyone watching. "Scarlett, I know this is hard to hear, but Emma didn't overhear anyone planning to hurt you. She overheard adults discussing your finances and your insurance policies, and her 10-year-old mind turned that into something sinister. But she seemed so certain about what she heard. She gave me specific details. Children can be very convincing when they believe their own fantasies. That's what makes this situation so dangerous. Emma has convinced herself that her story is true, and now she's convincing you. But if you really think about it, logically, does it make sense that your loving family would want to hurt you?" Frank's voice carried the perfect tone of reason and gentle authority, the voice of a wise adult helping a confused woman understand a difficult situation. If I hadn't known about his criminal history and seen the evidence of his fraud, I might have been completely convinced by his performance. "I suppose when you put it that way, it does sound pretty unlikely." I admitted, though every word tasted like poison in my mouth. "Exactly. And that's why I'm so concerned about Emma's mental state. When children start having elaborate fantasies about family members wanting to hurt them, it's usually a sign of deeper psychological issues that need professional attention." Frank was building towards something now, and I could sense that he was about to reveal more of his plan. Agent Park had told me that criminals like Frank couldn't resist showing off their intelligence and their control over situations. "What kind of professional attention?" I asked. "There are excellent residential treatment facilities for children who are struggling with trauma and grief. Places where Emma could get the intensive help she needs to work through these fantasies and learn to separate reality from imagination." My blood ran cold as I realized what Frank was suggesting. He wanted to have Emma committed to a psychiatric facility where her testimony about overhearing his murder plot would be dismissed as the ravings of a mentally ill child. "You want to put Emma in a mental hospital. Samai now." "I want to get Emma the help she needs before her condition gets worse," Frank replied smoothly. "And I want to protect you from the legal consequences of supporting a child's false accusations against innocent family members." "What legal consequences?" Frank leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since he'd arrived, I saw a hint of satisfaction in his expression. He thought he had me trapped, convinced that I was ready to abandon Emma's testimony and cooperate with his plan. "Scarlett making false accusations of attempted murder is a serious crime. If you continue to support Emma's story, you could be charged with filing false police reports, defamation, and even conspiracy to commit fraud. You could lose your job, your house, your reputation, everything. But if Emma really did hear something, Emma didn't hear anything except normal family conversation about finances and insurance. And the sooner you accept that reality, the sooner we can get your family back to normal. Frank's confidence was growing with each exchange, and I could see that he was preparing to make his final move. Agent Park had predicted this moment when Frank would become so certain of his control that he would reveal information that would incriminate him completely. "Frank, I want to believe you, but I'm still scared. What if something really is wrong? What if there really is some kind of danger to Emma and me?" Frank smiled the expression of a predator who believed his prey was finally submitting to his will. "Scarlett, the only danger to you and Emma is the damage these false accusations could do to your family relationships and your legal standing. But I have good news." "What kind of good news?" "I've been working with some very experienced professionals to resolve this situation quietly and permanently. People who specialize in helping families deal with exactly these kinds of misunderstandings." My heart raced as I realized Frank was about to reveal details about his conspiracy that would provide the FBI with everything they needed to arrest him and his accomplices. "What kind of professionals?" Frank glanced around the restaurant one more time, then leaned forward with the conspiratorial air of someone sharing a valuable secret. "Let me tell you exactly how we're going to fix this problem, Scarlett. And when I'm done explaining, you're going to understand why the best thing for everyone is to forget this whole unfortunate episode and move on with our lives as a happy family." As Frank prepared to lay out his plan in detail, I realized that his arrogance was about to destroy him completely. He was so confident in his manipulation and control that he was going to confess everything, providing the FBI with recorded evidence that would put him away for life. The trap was set, and Frank was about to walk directly into it. Frank settled back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a man who believed he had successfully manipulated his victim into submission. What he didn't know was that every word he was about to say was being recorded by FBI equipment and overheard by federal agents positioned throughout the restaurant. "Scarlett, what I'm about to tell you must stay between us until this whole situation is resolved." Frank began, his voice taking on the tone of someone sharing valuable inside information. "I've been working with some very discreet professionals to make sure Emma gets the help she needs, and you avoid any legal complications from these false accusations." "What kind of professionals?" I asked, though my skin was crawling with the knowledge that Frank was about to reveal the details of a conspiracy to destroy my family. "Well, first, there's Dr. Patricia Hensley, a child psychiatrist who specializes in treating children who make false allegations against family members. She's agreed to evaluate Emma and provide documentation that Emma's stories are the result of grief-induced fantasy disorder." I had never heard of grief-induced fantasy disorder, and I suspected Frank had made up the condition entirely. But the fact that he had already arranged for a corrupt psychiatrist to diagnose Emma with a fake mental illness showed the depth of his planning. "How did you find this psychiatrist?" Frank smiled proudly. "Dr. Hensley has helped our family before during some difficult situations with other relatives who had similar problems with reality distortion. She understands how trauma can cause children to create elaborate stories that seem real to them but are actually psychological coping mechanisms." The phrase "helped our family before" sent chills down my spine. Frank was admitting that he had used corrupt mental health professionals to silence other potential witnesses to his crimes. "What happens after Emma is evaluated?" "Dr. Hensley will recommend a residential treatment facility where Emma can receive intensive therapy to help her understand the difference between her fantasies and reality. It's actually a beautiful place, like a boarding school for children who need special help with emotional problems." Frank was describing a plan to have Emma institutionalized based on a fake psychiatric diagnosis, effectively silencing her testimony and making it impossible for her to expose his crimes. The casual way he discussed destroying a child's life made me physically sick. How long would Emma have to stay at this facility? Oh, probably just 6 to 8 months. Long enough for her to work through her grief issues and learn to stop making false accusations against people who love her. 8 months. Frank was planning to lock Emma away for 8 months while he completed whatever scheme he had planned for me. By the time she was released, I might be dead, and Frank would be free to claim that Emma's accusations were the ravings of a mentally ill child who had never recovered from losing her mother. And what about me? What happens while Emma is getting treatment? Frank's expression became even more solicitous, the look of a caring family member who had thought of everything. Well, you'll need some support during this difficult time. I've arranged for you to stay at your mother's house where we can all take care of you while Emma is away. Take care of me how? You've been under so much stress, Scarlett. You've lost weight, you're not sleeping well, you're having trouble concentrating at work. Dr. Hensley thinks you might benefit from some medication to help with anxiety and depression. The pieces of Frank's plan were falling into place with horrifying clarity. He wanted to have Emma committed to a psychiatric facility while he moved me into my mother's house, where he could isolate me from any outside support and begin systematically poisoning me with anxiety medication. What kind of medication? Just something mild to help you relax and sleep better. Dr. Hensley has some very effective treatments for the kind of stress-related symptoms you've been experiencing. Frank was planning to drug me into compliance while Emma was locked away in a fake mental hospital, probably using the same methods he had perfected on his previous wives. Once I was weak and disoriented from whatever chemicals he planned to give me, it would be easy to stage my death as an accidental overdose or suicide. Frank, this all sounds very comprehensive. How long have you been planning this? For the first time since he'd begun explaining his scheme, Frank looked slightly uncomfortable. Well, your mother and I have been concerned about you and Emma for several months now. We've been researching the best ways to help families dealing with these kinds of psychological crises. Several months since when? Frank's mask of concern slipped slightly, revealing a flash of irritation at my questions. Since your grandmother died, obviously. That's when we first noticed changes in your behavior and Emma's emotional state. But you just said Dr. Hensley has helped our family before with similar problems. What other relatives needed this kind of help? Frank realized he had revealed more than he intended, and I could see him calculating how to recover from his mistake. There have been other family situations over the years where grief and trauma caused people to have trouble distinguishing reality from imagination. The important thing is that we know how to handle these problems discreetly and effectively. Other family situations was Frank's euphemism for his previous murders, and handling problems discreetly meant eliminating witnesses and potential accusers. He was admitting to a pattern of using fake mental health diagnoses to silence people who threatened to expose his crimes. Frank, I have to ask you something directly, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course, sweetheart, you can ask me anything. I took a deep breath and asked the question Agent Park had instructed me to pose if the opportunity arose. Did Emma really misunderstand what she heard in the basement, or is there something else going on that I need to know about? Frank's expression became very still, and for several seconds he didn't say anything at all. I could see him weighing his options, trying to decide how much truth he could safely reveal without completely destroying his carefully constructed narrative. Scarlett, what Emma heard in the basement was a conversation between adults about solving some very serious family problems that could affect everyone's future security and happiness. What kind of problems? Frank leaned forward again, his voice dropping to a whisper that the recording equipment would barely pick up. Problems involving your inheritance, your insurance policies, and some financial decisions that need to be made for the good of the whole family. I don't understand. What financial decisions? Your grandmother left you a substantial estate, Scarlett, but there are complications with how that money and property are being managed. Complications that could be resolved much more easily if certain legal arrangements were simplified. Frank was admitting that my grandmother's inheritance was the motive for his scheme, but he was still trying to make it sound like a legitimate family business discussion rather than a murder plot. Simplified how Frank's smile became predatory, the expression of someone who believed his victim was finally ready to hear the complete truth. Scarlett, what if I told you that there was a way to resolve all of these problems permanently? A way that would ensure Emma's future is secure, and the family assets are properly managed by people who understand how to handle money responsibly. I would ask you to explain exactly what you mean. Frank glanced around the restaurant one final time, then looked directly into my eyes with an expression that made my blood freeze. What I mean, my dear stepdaughter, is that sometimes the best way to solve complicated problems is to eliminate the complications entirely. And sometimes the people who create complications need to be redirected in ways that serve the greater good of the family. The confession was complete. Frank had just admitted on tape that he planned to eliminate complications and redirect people who stood in the way of his financial schemes. Combined with his detailed description of having Emma institutionalized and me medicated, his words constituted a clear admission of conspiracy to commit murder and fraud. I saw Agent Park stand up from his table across the restaurant, speaking quietly into his phone as other agents began moving into position. Frank was still talking, still explaining his philosophy of solving family problems through redirection, completely unaware that his own words had just sealed his fate. The trap had worked perfectly. Frank's arrogance and need to demonstrate his cleverness had led him to confess everything on tape, providing the FBI with evidence that would not only convict him for planning my murder, but would also help them prosecute him for the deaths of his previous wives. As federal agents closed in around our table, I realized that Frank had made the same mistake that had destroyed every criminal throughout history. He had underestimated his victims and overestimated his own intelligence. The hunt was over, and justice was about to be served. Frank was still explaining his philosophy of family problem solving when Agent Park appeared beside our table, his badge clearly visible as he placed his hand firmly on Frank's shoulder. Franklin Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and identity theft, Agent Park said in a clear, authoritative voice that carried across the restaurant. Frank's face went through a series of transformations in the span of 3 seconds. Confusion, recognition, rage, and finally a cold calculation as he realized the extent of his exposure. Other diners in the restaurant looked up from their meals as additional FBI agents moved in to secure the area. "This is ridiculous," Frank said, his voice carrying the perfect tone of innocent outrage that he had perfected over years of manipulation. "I was having a private conversation with my stepdaughter about family matters. You have no right to interfere. We have every right when that private conversation involves planning to murder your stepdaughter and have her daughter falsely committed to a psychiatric facility." Agent Park replied calmly as he handcuffed Frank's hands behind his back. I stood up from the table, my legs shaky but my voice steady. "Frank, Emma heard every word you said in that basement. She heard you planning to poison me at Mom's birthday party, and she saved both our lives by being brave enough to warn me." For the first time since I had known him, Frank's mask of benevolent concern disappeared completely. The man looking back at me was cold, calculating, and filled with rage at having his carefully laid plans destroyed by a 10-year-old child. "You stupid little girl." He snarled, his voice completely different from the gentle tone he had been using moments before. "Do you have any idea how much money you've cost me? How many months of planning you've ruined?" "Months?" Agent Park asked. "Try years. We found your storage unit, Franklin. We have recordings of you discussing this murder plot going back 18 months. We also have recordings of you bragging about killing your previous wives." The color drained from Frank's face as he realized the full extent of what the FBI had uncovered. Those recordings are private property. You had no right to access them. We had court orders based on evidence provided by Mrs. Johnson and her daughter, evidence that led us to connect you to unsolved murders in 6 different states. As Agent Park led Frank toward the restaurant exit, other FBI agents were simultaneously moving in on the rest of the conspiracy. Agent Park's radio crackled with updates from teams that were arresting Bradley and Susan at their respective homes. Bradley Hoffman is in custody at his residence, came the first report. We found additional forged documents and correspondence with the fake law firm. Susan Patterson arrested without incident at her workplace, came the second report. She immediately asked for a lawyer and refused to make any statements. My phone rang as we watched Frank being placed in the back of an FBI vehicle. It was Amanda Walsh calling from her office, where she had been monitoring the operation. "Scarlett, are you all right?" Amanda asked. "I'm okay. Shaken up, but okay. Is Emma safe?" "Emma is fine. She's been watching the arrests on television with the agents protecting her, and she's very proud of how brave you were today." As the FBI vehicles drove away with Frank in custody, I realized that this nightmare was finally coming to an end. But Agent Park had one more revelation that would show the true scope of Frank's criminal operation. "Scarlett, we need to talk about what we found when we searched your mother's house this morning," Agent Park said as we walked to his car. "What did you find?" "Frank had been systematically drugging your mother with low doses of sedatives for the past 6 months. We found prescription bottles hidden in his belongings, with your mother's name on them, but the medications were never prescribed by her doctor." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. He was poisoning Mom, too. Slowly and carefully, making her confused and compliant so she wouldn't question his activities or notice his suspicious behavior. Your mother had no idea she was being drugged, which is why she never suspected that Frank was planning to kill you. I thought about Mom's behavior over the past few months, how tired she had seemed, how often she forgot things, how she had deferred to Frank's opinions even when they seemed unusual. I had attributed her changes to normal aging and the stress of adjusting to life after losing my grandmother, never imagining that her own husband was systematically poisoning her. Is she going to be all right? She's in the hospital now getting the drugs flushed from her system. The doctors expect her to make a complete recovery, but it will take several weeks for her to fully understand what Frank did to her and your family. As Agent Park drove me to the safe house where Emma was waiting, I tried to process the magnitude of what we had uncovered. Frank hadn't just been planning to kill me for money. He had been systematically destroying my entire family, drugging my mother into compliance while he forged documents and built his case for having Emma institutionalized. Agent Park, how many other families has Frank destroyed? We're still investigating, but we believe he's responsible for at least 8 deaths over the past 15 years, possibly more. Your courage in gathering evidence and Emma's bravery in speaking the truth is going to help us bring justice for all of those victims. When we arrived at the safe house, Emma ran into my arms with such force that she nearly knocked me over. She was laughing and crying at the same time, relief and joy and pride all mixed together in her bright expression. "Mommy, we caught him. We caught all of them." "Yes, baby, we did. And they're never going to hurt anyone else again." Agent Park knelt down to Emma's level. "Emma, I want you to know that you're a hero. Your courage and intelligence saved your mother's life and helped us solve crimes that go back many years. A lot of families are going to get justice because you were brave enough to speak the truth." Emma looked up at me with serious eyes. "Mommy, are we safe now?" I hugged her tighter, feeling the weight of months of fear and uncertainty finally lifting from my shoulders. "Yes, sweetheart, we're safe now. We can go home." As we prepared to leave the safe house and return to our real lives, I realized that Frank had made one final miscalculation. He had assumed that love and family bonds were weaknesses that could be exploited and manipulated. Instead, Our love for each other had given us the strength to fight back against his evil and protect not only ourselves, but countless other potential victims. The nightmare was over, but the lessons Emma and I had learned about courage, truth, and the power of believing in each other would stay with us forever. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse watching Frank face the consequences of his crimes. The man who had once seemed like a caring stepfather now looked small and defeated in his orange prison jumpsuit, his hands shackled as he stood before Judge Patricia Williams for sentencing. The trial had been a revelation of evil that exceeded even my worst fears. FBI investigators had uncovered evidence connecting Frank to 11 murders spanning 2 decades, each one carefully planned and executed for financial gain. His real name was Franklin Morrison, and he had used at least 6 different identities as he moved across the country targeting vulnerable women. Mr. Morrison, the evidence presented in this case, reveals a pattern of predatory behavior that spans multiple states and has resulted in the deaths of 11 innocent people. Judge Williams said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority, "You have shown no remorse for your actions and have continued to maintain your innocence despite overwhelming evidence of your guilt." Emma sat beside me in the courtroom gallery, now 11 years old, and remarkably poised as she watched the man who had tried to destroy our family face justice. She had testified during the trial with a clarity and courage that impressed everyone in the courtroom, never wavering from her account of what she had overheard that day in my mother's basement. "The recordings recovered from your storage unit reveal a level of premeditation and callousness that defies comprehension," the judge continued. "You documented your crimes with pride, discussing your victims as nothing more than financial opportunities to be exploited and eliminated." Frank's lawyer had tried to argue that his client suffered from mental illness and deserved consideration for diminished capacity, but the prosecution had demonstrated that Frank's actions were the product of calculated greed, not psychological impairment. His meticulous planning, his ability to maintain false identities for years at a time, and his systematic approach to identifying and targeting victims all prove that he was fully aware of his actions and their consequences. "You exploited the trust and love of families who welcomed you into their lives, and you used their vulnerability as a weapon against them," Judge Williams said. "The impact of your crimes extends far beyond your direct victims to include children who lost their mothers, parents who lost their daughters, and communities that lost valuable members." Bradley and Susan had been sentenced the previous week after pleading guilty to conspiracy charges. Bradley received 25 years in federal prison for his role in planning my murder and helping Frank forge documents. Susan received 20 years after her lawyer convinced the court that Frank had manipulated her through psychological abuse, though she still bore full responsibility for choosing to participate in a plot to kill her own niece. The court has reviewed the victim impact statements submitted by surviving family members, and their words paint a picture of devastation that your actions have caused across multiple states and communities. The judge continued. Mrs. Scarlett Johnson and her daughter Emma have spoken with particular eloquence about the trauma you inflicted on their family and their determination to ensure that you never harm anyone else again. I had submitted a detailed impact statement describing the months of fear Emma and I had endured, the violation of having our own family members plot our deaths, and the ongoing challenges of rebuilding our sense of safety and trust. But I had also written about the strength we had discovered in ourselves and the hope we felt knowing that Frank would never hurt another family. Emma had written her own statement in her careful 11-year-old handwriting, explaining how Frank's actions had taught her the importance of speaking up when adults were doing wrong things, even when those adults were family members who were supposed to protect children. Mr. Morrison, for the crimes of conspiracy to commit murder in the first-degree identity fraud, insurance fraud, and violations of federal racketeering statutes, this court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole, Judge Williams announced. Frank showed no emotion as the sentence was pronounced, but I saw his shoulders slump slightly as the reality of spending the rest of his life in prison finally penetrated his arrogance. He would never again have the opportunity to manipulate vulnerable families or target innocent women for financial gain. Additionally, the court orders restitution in the amount of $2.7 million to be distributed among the families of your victims, though no amount of money can compensate for the lives you have taken or the trauma you have caused. As federal marshals led Frank away from the courtroom, for the last time he turned and looked directly at Emma and me. For just a moment, I saw a flash of the rage that had driven him to commit so many terrible crimes, but it was quickly replaced by the hollow emptiness of a man who had lost everything. Emma squeezed my hand as we watched Frank disappear through the door that would take him to federal prison for the rest of his life. "Mommy, it's really over now, isn't it?" "Yes, baby, it's really over." Outside the courthouse, Agent Park and attorney Amanda Walsh were waiting to congratulate us on the successful conclusion of the case. Over the past 6 months, they had become more than professional allies. They had become genuine friends who had helped us navigate the complex legal process and rebuild our sense of security. "Scarlett, I want you to know that your courage in gathering evidence and Emma's bravery in testifying helped us close cold cases in 6 different states," Agent Park said. "Frank's conviction brings justice not just for your family, but for all the families he destroyed over the years." Amanda Walsh had helped us through the legal proceedings while also assisting with the practical challenges of rebuilding our lives. She had worked with my employer to ensure my job was protected during the trial, helped us access counseling services to process our trauma, and even helped us navigate the media attention that came with being at the center of such a high-profile case. "You two have shown incredible strength throughout this entire ordeal," Amanda said. "Frank thought he could manipulate and intimidate you into silence, but instead you fought back and won." As we drove home from the courthouse, Emma was unusually quiet. Finally, she asked the question that had been weighing on both our minds. "Mommy, do you think there are other bad people like Frank out there?" "Probably," I answered honestly. "But I also think there are a lot more good people who will fight to protect innocent families when they understand what's happening. Like Agent Park and Mrs. Walsh and Mrs. Rodriguez and Dr. Chen. Exactly like them, and like you, Emma. You're one of the good people who fights back when someone tries to hurt innocent people." Emma smiled, the first completely carefree expression I had seen on her face in months. "I'm glad we're the good guys, Mommy." "Me too, baby, me too." As we pulled into the driveway of our little yellow house on Oak Street, I realized that Frank's greatest failure wasn't just underestimating our courage or intelligence. His greatest failure was assuming that evil would always triumph over good, that manipulation would always defeat truth, and that fear would always conquer love. Instead, he had learned that when good people stand together and refuse to be silenced, justice will ultimately prevail no matter how sophisticated or cruel the evil they face. The nightmare was over and we could finally begin to heal. 1 year after Frank's sentencing, Emma and I sat in Dr. Jennifer Martinez's office for what would be our final family therapy session. The past 12 months had been a journey of healing that neither of us could have imagined when we first fled from my mother's birthday party in terror. When you first came to see me, both of you were dealing with severe trauma from betrayal by family members and the ongoing threat to your safety. Dr. Martinez said, reviewing her notes from our early sessions, "Emma was having nightmares about adults hurting her mother, and Scarlett, you were struggling with trust issues and hypervigilance. I remember feeling like I could never be safe anywhere." I said, thinking back to those early months when I checked locks obsessively and jumped at every unexpected sound. I couldn't believe that my own family had tried to kill me, and I didn't know who else might be dangerous. Emma, now 12 years old and noticeably more confident than she had been a year ago, added her own perspective. I kept worrying that other adults might be lying to us the way Frank and Uncle Bradley and Aunt Susan did. It was hard to know who to trust. Dr. Martinez had helped us work through the complex emotions that came with surviving such an extreme betrayal. She had taught us techniques for managing anxiety, helped us rebuild our sense of safety, and guided us through the process of learning to trust people again without becoming naive or vulnerable. Or, what do you think has been the most important part of your healing process? Dr. Martinez asked. Emma and I looked at each other, and I could see the same answer in her eyes that I felt in my heart. Learning that we can take care of each other and protect each other, Emma said, and learning that there really are good people who will help us when we need it. Over the past year, our lives had been transformed in ways that went far beyond just recovering from trauma. I had started my own accounting practice, specializing in helping victims of financial fraud recover their assets and rebuild their lives. The work was personally meaningful and professionally successful, giving me a sense of purpose that went beyond just earning a living. Emma had not only recovered from her trauma, but had become something of a local hero. She spoke regularly at schools and community centers about the importance of trusting children when they report dangerous situations, and she had started a peer counseling program to help other kids recognize and report adult manipulation. I like helping other kids understand that it's okay to tell on grown-ups when they're doing bad things, Emma explained to Dr. Martinez. A lot of kids think they'll get in trouble for telling the truth about adults, but I tell them that good adults want kids to speak up when something is wrong. My mother had made a remarkable recovery once Frank's drugging was discovered and treated. The months of systematic poisoning had affected her memory and judgment, but as the chemicals left her system, she gradually returned to her sharp, caring self. She had moved to a senior community closer to Emma and me, and our relationship had grown stronger than it had ever been. Mom feels terrible about bringing Frank into our family, I told Dr. Martinez, but I've helped her understand that Frank was a professional manipulator who fooled law enforcement officers and social workers and judges. She couldn't have known what he really was. Emma had been particularly helpful in reassuring her grandmother that no one blamed her for Frank's deception. I tell Grandma that Frank was really good at pretending to be nice, and that's not her fault. Even smart people can be tricked by really good liars. The financial restitution from Frank's crimes had provided Emma and me with security we had never experienced before. We had paid off our mortgage-established college funds and even taken the vacation to Europe that Emma had dreamed about. But more importantly, the money had allowed me to start my practice helping other fraud victims without worrying about immediate income. Helping other families who went through what we went through has been incredibly healing, I explained to Dr. Martinez. It makes Frank's crimes feel less meaningless when we can use our experience to protect other people. Emma had also found healing through helping others. Her peer counseling program had already helped several children recognize and report inappropriate behavior by adults, and she had received recognition from the State Attorney General's office for her work in child protection advocacy. Do you feel like Frank still has power over your lives? Dr. Martinez asked. Not really, Emma answered immediately. Sometimes I think about what happened, but it doesn't scare me anymore. It makes me feel proud that we were brave enough to fight back and smart enough to win. I nodded in agreement. Frank took a lot from us, but he also taught us how strong we are and how much we can trust each other. In some ways, going through that experience made our relationship stronger than it would have been otherwise. Dr. Martinez smiled, making a final note in her file. You've both done remarkable work in processing this trauma and using it as motivation to help other people. That's not just healing, that's post-traumatic growth. As we prepared to leave Dr. Martinez's office for the last time, Emma asked a question that had been on her mind for weeks. Dr. Martinez, do you think what happened to us will make me a better mom someday? I think what happened to you taught you some very important lessons about protecting children and recognizing danger, Dr. Martinez replied. But more importantly, it taught you that you have the courage and intelligence to face difficult situations and the strength to ask for help when you need it. That evening, Emma and I attended the graduation ceremony for the latest class of children who had completed her peer counseling program. watching 12 kids between the ages of 8 and 14 receive certificates for learning how to recognize and report dangerous adult behavior filled me with pride in Emma's accomplishments and hope for the future. "Mom, do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been brave enough to call you that day?" Emma asked as we drove home from the ceremony. "I think about that sometimes," I admitted. "But then I remind myself that you were brave enough, and that's what matters. You saved both our lives by trusting your instincts and speaking the truth. And you saved us by believing me and fighting back instead of just giving up." As we pulled into our driveway, I looked at the little yellow house that had once felt violated and unsafe, but now felt like a true sanctuary. We had redecorated extensively, replacing everything that reminded us of Frank's intrusion, and we had installed the best security system we could afford. But more importantly, we had filled the house with friends and laughter and the kind of genuine family relationships that Frank had tried to destroy. "Emma, what do you think is the most important thing we learned from everything that happened?" Emma thought for a moment, her face serious in the glow of our porch light. "I think we learned that family isn't just about being related to people. Family is about people who protect each other and tell each other the truth even when it's hard." "That's exactly right, baby. And I think we also learned that we're stronger than we ever knew we could be. And that good people are stronger than bad people when they work together." As we walked up to our front door, I reflected on the long journey from that terrifying phone call at my mother's birthday party to this moment of peace and security. Frank had intended to destroy us, but instead he had revealed strengths we didn't know we possessed and taught us lessons about courage and resilience that would serve us for the rest of our lives. The little girl who had been brave enough to warn her mother about danger had grown into a young woman who was dedicated to protecting other children. The frightened woman who had fled in terror had become a successful advocate for fraud victims and a symbol of hope for families facing betrayal and manipulation. We had not just survived Frank's evil, we had transformed it into a force for good that would protect and help other families for years to come. And that transformation was the greatest victory of all. 2 years after Frank's conviction, I stood at the podium in a hotel conference room filled with domestic violence survivors, social workers, and law enforcement officials preparing to deliver the keynote speech at the National Conference on Family Violence Prevention. Emma, now 13 and poised beyond her years, sat in the front row with the same determined expression she had worn when she first called to warn me about Frank's plot. When my 10-year-old daughter called to tell me to get out of my mother's house immediately, I had a choice to make. I began looking out at the audience of people who understood the complexities of family betrayal and survival. I could dismiss her warning as a child's imagination, or I could trust that she had witnessed something genuinely dangerous. That choice saved both our lives. The conference had invited me to speak because our case had become a model for how children's testimony should be handled in family violence situations, and how victims could work with law enforcement to gather evidence and build cases against their abusers. But more importantly, our story had become an example of how families could not only survive betrayal, but emerge stronger and more purposeful. Frank Morrison, the man I knew as my stepfather, Frank Miller, was a professional predator who had perfected the art of using family bonds as weapons against his victims. He understood that people's love for their family members could be manipulated to make them vulnerable to financial fraud, emotional abuse, and ultimately murder. In the 2 years since the trial, I had built my accounting practice into a thriving business that specialized in helping fraud victims recover their assets and rebuild their financial lives. I had testified before Congress about the need for better protection against identity theft and insurance fraud, and I had worked with the FBI to develop training programs for agents who investigate family-based financial crimes. But Frank made a critical error in his calculations. He assumed that love and trust were weaknesses that could be exploited indefinitely. He didn't understand that genuine family bonds, the kind built on honesty, protection, and mutual respect, actually create strength that predators cannot overcome. Emma had become something of a celebrity in child protection circles, speaking at conferences and schools about the importance of listening to children who report dangerous adult behavior. She had been featured in national magazines and had even testified before a Senate subcommittee about improving child witness protection programs. My daughter Emma taught me that children often see truth more clearly than adults do, because they haven't yet learned to make excuses for inexcusable behavior. When Emma told me that the adults in our family were planning to hurt me, she wasn't being dramatic or imaginative. She was being accurate. The audience included several families who had survived similar ordeals, and I could see recognition in their faces as I described the process of learning to trust again after such profound betrayal. One woman in the third row was crying quietly, probably remembering her own moment of realization that someone she loved was trying to harm her. The most important lesson Emma and I learned is that family is not defined by blood relationships or legal documents. Family is defined by the actions people take to protect and care for each other. The people who tried to kill us for money were related to us, but they were not our family. Our real family consists of the people who believed us when we told the truth, who stood with us when we faced danger, and who helped us rebuild our lives when the nightmare was over. After the conference, Emma and I drove to our favorite restaurant to celebrate what had become an annual tradition, marking the anniversary of Frank's sentencing with a dinner where we talked about our goals for the coming year and reflected on how far we had traveled from those terrifying days when we were hiding in motel rooms. "Mom, do you think we'll always be helping families like ours?" Emma asked as we waited for our food to arrive. "I think we'll be helping people in some way for the rest of our lives," I replied, "whether it's fraud victims or child witnesses or just people who need to know that they can survive betrayal and build better lives." Emma had already decided that she wanted to become a child psychologist, specializing in trauma recovery, and she was taking advanced courses in psychology and social work at her high school. She had also started working part-time at a local crisis center, answering phones and providing peer support to other teenagers who were dealing with family violence. "Sometimes I think about what kind of person I would have become if Frank had succeeded in his plan," Emma said thoughtfully. "I would have grown up thinking that my mother had died accidentally, never knowing that she was murdered by people who were supposed to love us." "But that didn't happen," I reminded her. "You were brave enough to speak up, and I was smart enough to listen to you. We protected each other. And now we protect other people too." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of our server, a young woman named Sarah, who had become familiar with our monthly visits to the restaurant. As she set down our plates, she mentioned that she was studying criminal justice at the community college and hoped to become a victim advocate. "I've been following your story since the trial," Sarah said. "My professor assigned your congressional testimony as required reading in our family violence class. What you and Emma did to fight back against your family members has inspired a lot of people." After Sarah left, Emma smiled at me across the table. "It's weird that we're inspiring people, isn't it? When we were hiding in those motel rooms, I never thought anyone would ever know about what happened to us. I think people find our story inspiring because it shows that ordinary families can overcome extraordinary evil when they stick together and refuse to give up," I said. "We weren't specially trained law enforcement officers or professional investigators. We were just a mom and daughter who loved each other enough to fight for our lives." As we ate dinner, Emma told me about her latest project at the crisis center, developing a program to help siblings support each other when one of their parents was abusive. She'd been working with a family where a 15-year-old boy was trying to protect his younger sister from their father's violence, and she was using her own experience to help them navigate the complex emotions of family betrayal. "The hardest part for kids is feeling like they're betraying their family by telling the truth about abuse," Emma explained. "I try to help them understand that protecting someone you love is not betrayal. It's the most important thing family members can do for each other." On our drive home, we passed the house where my mother had lived when Frank was manipulating her with drugs and lies. She had sold that house and moved to a senior living community where she had made new friends and built a life free from the shadows of Frank's deception. We visited her every Sunday for dinner, and she had become one of Emma's closest allies in the work of helping other families. "Mom, do you ever miss the way our family used to be before we knew the truth about Frank?" Emma asked as we turned into our driveway. It was a question she asked periodically, and my answer was always the same. I miss thinking that we had a big, loving, extended family, but I don't miss living with people who were planning to murder us. The family we have now is smaller, but it's real. And we have friends who are like family too. Exactly. Agent Park and Amanda Walsh and Dr. Martinez and Mrs. Rodriguez, they're all part of our chosen family. As we walked up to our front door, I noticed the new security system we had installed was working perfectly, and I felt the same sense of safety and peace that had taken months to rebuild after Frank's arrest. Our house was no longer a place where we hid from danger. It was a sanctuary where we planned our work to help other families and celebrated our victories over the people who had tried to destroy us. Emma, if you could give advice to other kids who might be in situations like the one we survived, what would you tell them? Emma considered the question carefully as we hung up our coats and settled into our living room. I would tell them to trust their instincts when something feels wrong, even if the adults involved are people they're supposed to love and respect. I would tell them that speaking the truth about dangerous adults is not tattling. It's protecting yourself and the people you care about. What else? I would tell them that surviving something terrible can actually make you stronger and give you the power to help other people who are going through the same thing. What Frank did to us was horrible, but it also taught us how brave we could be and how much good we could do with our lives. As we prepared for bed, I reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought us to this place of peace and purpose. Frank had intended to erase us from existence to steal our money and our lives and our future. Instead, his crimes had revealed strengths we never knew we possessed and had given us a mission that filled our lives with meaning. Emma had grown from a frightened 10-year-old into a confident teenager who was already making a difference in other people's lives. I had transformed from a naive woman who trusted too easily into a successful advocate who helped other families rebuild after betrayal and fraud. "Good night, Mom," Emma called from her bedroom. "I love you." "I love you too, baby. Sweet dreams." As I turned off the lights and checked our security system one final time, I realized that Frank's greatest failure had been underestimating the power of authentic love between a mother and daughter. He had assumed that fear and manipulation would always triumph over trust and courage. Instead, he had learned that when people truly love each other, they will fight harder and longer and more intelligently than any predator can anticipate. The little girl who had saved our lives with a phone call had become a young woman, dedicated to saving other children. The frightened mother who had fled into the night had become a voice for justice and protection for vulnerable families everywhere. We had not just survived Frank's evil, we had transformed it into a force for good that would protect countless other families for generations to come. And in doing so, we had discovered the most important truth of all, that love is not just an emotion, but an action, a choice, and ultimately the most powerful weapon against evil that has ever existed. Before going to sleep, I want to ask you something that I think about often. Have you ever had to choose between being polite to family members and protecting yourself or someone you love? How do you know when to trust your instincts, even when other people tell you you're being paranoid or dramatic? I hope our story helps you understand that trusting your gut feelings about dangerous people, even when those people are family members, can save your life. If you found our story meaningful, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more real stories of survival and justice. Share this with anyone who might need to hear it, and leave a comment telling us about your own experiences with trusting your instincts in difficult situations. Remember that speaking the truth about dangerous people is not betrayal, it's protection. And sometimes the greatest act of love you can perform is having the courage to expose evil, even when it comes from people who are supposed to love you. Thank you for listening to our story, and I wish you and your families safety, genuine love, and the courage to always choose truth over politeness when someone's life is at stake. Stay safe, stay strong, and never be afraid to trust the voice inside you that warns you when something is wrong.